Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to The Open Door. Jim Hanink here with co-host Mario Ramos-Reyes. Joining us again is regular panelist Christopher Zenger. Today's welcome and special guest is noted Distributist author John Medaille. First, we begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you will renew the face of the earth. Lord, by the light of the Holy Spirit, you have taught the hearts of your faithful. In the same Spirit, help us to relish what is right and always rejoice in your consolation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
John, could you tell us just a bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to be a distributist?
Well, I was sort of raised that way on G.K. Chesterton, but I came to be a distributist author by accident. I teach social justice to business students at the University of Dallas. The university, I was in business for 40 years, but I was taking a master's degree at the University of Dallas, and they asked me to set up this course because they wanted the business students to learn this, but they didn't have anybody to teach it. So I looked for a suitable textbook and couldn't find one because they really weren't aimed at business students. So I ended up having to write my own textbook. And oddly enough, it got published, which sort of surprised me. And then I followed that up with a second book, which was again published by the ISI, and which the American Conservative called the best economic thinking in a long time. And I have another book coming out this year, but not on distributism. So it all happened by accident, and all the good things in life really happen by accident. No good ever comes of planning.
Oh, whoa! Even the American Solidarity Party happened by accident, and we're going to succeed without planning? How can that be?
Well, you know, planning prepares you for something, but what actually happens is never planned. So, as they say in the Army, no battle plan ever survives first contact.
All right. Well, as distributism comes to be better known and better appreciated, I imagine that there'll be a feature somewhere or other, probably never in the New York Times. There'll be a feature with a name like The Week in Review, a Distributist Perspective. And maybe you could help us launch such a Week in Review today. And I'm going to start it off with a question that's based on, well, I guess we can plan on this, wars and rumors of war. With these rumors of war, there are ordinarily calls for patriotic participation in them. Is there a distributist perspective on international conflicts?
Well, I don't know about a distributist perspective. There's my perspective, and it is stay out of them insofar as possible.
Stay away?
Stay away, yes.
Now, suppose somebody says, well, you're just an isolationist. You would respond how?
It sounds pretty good to me. Yes. Yeah, I think we used to call that minding your own business, but and it used to be considered a virtue. But I see no good that came out of World War One. World War II, we actually were attacked, so we would have been difficult to avoid. But having spent 2 years in Vietnam, I'm not quite sure what was gained from that adventure or from all of our adventures in the Middle East.
So you believe in the notion that good fences make good neighbors, but at the same time, if somebody crashes through your fence, you do what you can to restore it.
Exactly, yes. You have obviously the right of self-defense, but and in reality, one can argue, I suppose, that the world needs some sort of guarantor of international order in a world made up of pirates. So there can be defenses of military and international military involvement, but I remain skeptical of them.
So there could be a UN peacekeeping force, but we'd want to watch that too to see whether it really keeps the peace or inflames the wars.
Sure, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I'm not sure whether the peacekeeping forces ever actually keep the peace or are capable of doing so, but, it's possible.
All right, well, that's a good start. I wonder if Mario wants to move us along in this week in review.
Well, I'm listening carefully about what you are saying. It's very interesting, but I have no counter argument. Only that I wonder if, in order our system, political regime or liberal democracy, whatever you want to call it, republicanism, we also need neighbors who share our values in order to trade with them much, much better than you trade with authoritarian regimes. So if the claim that we should not intervene is true, then we may be surrounded by people who are completely the opposite to our own view about political democracy. So wouldn't that then justify at least some solidarity with these people, not using force, but other means so that they can somehow build, nurture, and create a system similar to ours so that we can engage in better ways, trade and other exchanges? What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not sure you can't trade with people of different political systems. It seems to me that's the way it's always been done. Nobody required your trading partners to be of a particular political persuasion. That being said, yes, there's some problems with being surrounded by, say, hostile regimes. When you talk about other means, though, that's in fact what we do. I mean, most of our interventions are under the table. They're through the CIA and through means like that. And I'm not sure that's a good idea either. The CIA has, shall we say, not always been a force for good, and it has been used mainly to prop up not democratic regimes, but repressive regimes around the world. So the counter argument is that they are fighting, other secret services that do the same. So yeah, you can again make the case, but 9 times out of 10, I think it works out very poorly. Well, I mean, the primary example you can look at now is how we changed the regime in Iran in 1953, or the regime in Saigon in, 1964 or 5, and just what disasters those were. And of course, you can go all over South America and find meddling by the CIA, almost always in favor of American corporate interests and not in favor of democracy or anything like that.
Does that square with your understanding of Latin America, Mario?
Not quite. I think I have a different view myself. I have experienced that thanks to U.S. International policy in the 80s. Paraguay achieved his long-awaited liberal democracy. So there has been other cases, there's no question about that, but we cannot rule out that there are certain intervention, which may not be military intervention, but different ways by which you can create an atmosphere so that these people can liberate themselves. And so the view from many Latin Americans toward the United States is not exclusively that view, which claims that everything that we did from the U.S. in South America is in just defending corporate interests. You just saw last Tuesday during the reunion, the president of Venezuela standing there, and he's a fighter for freedom. I don't think he is defending corporate interests. Ideologically, he is not what we may call classical liberal. Quite the contrary, he's a social democrat, and he's looking for just re-election, looking for what people can express themselves. People cannot be tortured, and so. So the situation, I think, is more complex. There are variety of perspectives. There is not only military regime in Latin America. Has been system which were the middle way, Christian democracies, social democracies in general. So I'm not quite have this view. That's my first reaction to that.
Well, maybe.
Well, I have to interject here. I have to ask. It seems to me, listening to what you say, and I'm not an expert in South America, and won't claim any, but I hear at one time you say, "Oh, we're defending, that people shouldn't be tortured," but then you seem to be defending the intervention in Chile, which brought about Pinochet. With the regime.
I didn't. Well, but I didn't even mention Pinochet. I'm not defending him. I didn't say anything about that. I think you are assuming that, but I'm not saying that.
Okay, well that's good. Okay.
No,
well, when you said Chile, I thought you were referring to Pinochet.
Well, I don't remember even mentioning Chile, but anyhow.
Well, let's see if Christopher has a third opinion.
Well, my third way, right? One thing I'm curious of these kind of conversations, there's always this underlying assumption that the United States has this duty. And I think that behind it lies a kind of sense that we in the United States have a certain level of virtue, political virtue, that other nations do not have. And in some ways, it even comes to the point, I remember growing up, they cannot have because we have a certain status. It's unclear to me that we're talking about liberating other countries, but have we really liberated ourselves? And do we have the moral basis upon which to go out into the world and start determining which regime should stand and which should fall? I think it brings it back to the other question we brought up before about the international authority. that to a certain extent, an international authority makes sense because you don't want anarchy on the national level or on the state level, but you also don't want anarchy on the international level. So there has to be, we would think there's some, in a world like ours, some guarantor of international law, but it seems the assumption often is that the United States is that guarantor of international law. So my question would be is, why do we assume that?
And to that question, I have no answer whatsoever. I don't think that we have, that Americans live on a higher moral plane, that we could tell the South Americans how to order their affairs. I think that should be left to South American organizations. You know, whatever happens in Venezuela should be the responsibility maybe of regional organizations in South America, and not primarily from the United States.
Now, there's a distributist perspective in what you're saying. Problems should be dealt with at the local level first, and if we're talking about world affairs, at the regional level first.
Yes.
All right, let me have one more test case, and I got to tell you, John, and Mario and Christopher will agree, we usually have about 10 points that we'd like to cover in the course of a conversation, but we usually don't make it past the first 2 or 3, but we keep trying. But I want to offer one more test case, and I think it's the most significant test case. We have constant discussion, heated discussion on trade with China. Now, China right now is engaged in an escalating attack on religious freedom, and the most flagrant example of that is there are perhaps a million Muslims now in good citizenship centers, a.k.a. detention camps, where they are being regroomed for better participation as citizens in China. And this is all under the direction of a manifestly authoritarian leader. Now, that should it not, influence our trade with China? It shouldn't simply be ignored, should it?
Well, if you're asking me, we should support the Uyghurs as best we can. I don't know precisely what form that support should take, but it should, of course, begin with a forceful denunciation of the situation. Where it goes from there, well, I'm certainly open to ideas.
All right. Now, here's an idea that connects with our discussion. We have a president here in the United States who bears watching, and we have a leader in China who bears watching, and we all grew up hearing people say, "Throw the bums out." Now, that's easier said than done. What about this whole impeachment saga that's now wrapping up? It didn't work. Is it structured so that it can't work? And what might be a distributist perspective on removing dangerous leaders?
Well, make them less dangerous by having a less dangerous political system. America's a peculiar place. I mean, politically, it starts off with some assumptions that were never true from the beginning. It has a sort of clogged together constitution that grants more rights to people in Wyoming than to California. The impeachment process was made to be almost impossible. It's never actually been done. Well, it's been done once. You can say that Nixon was removed by impeachment when he saw that he was going to lose an impeachment battle. It probably works as well as it can under our Constitution, but the Constitution itself is. I'm not a big fan of the Constitution. It was a response to a problem, a particular political problem, but I think it needs revisions, and mostly the idea that the states, these creations, which were creations of the federal government to begin with, at least all but the first 13, that they are all equal members. I don't know. It's hard for me to grant that to Wyoming. Should be in the Senate the equal of Texas, California, and New York. I just have a problem with that.
But we can only revise the Constitution in accord with the Constitution.
Right.
Which makes things very difficult, and you almost wonder if there could be some sort of American Brexit. I don't know. Well, let's switch. Let's switch from our structural problems to Brexit. Why not? We're going international in our discussion. As a distributist, watching the battle over Brexit, did you have some distributist insights?
Are you asking me?
You better believe it. we don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's why you're getting the big money, John. It's because you have something to say.
Yeah, these questions all come with the big bucks. I understand that, but I have mixed feelings about Brexit because I have mixed feelings about the European Union. The European Union has probably overall been a good thing. What has not been a good thing is the European currency, the euro. The loss of currency, control over your currency, is the loss of sovereignty. And so the pigs learned this lesson. Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, Spain learned this lesson that the ECB, the European Central Bank, were dictating to them. As far as a trade union and politically closer ties, I thought Europe had needed that for a long, long time. Europe is very, very tribal and tends to fall into tribal wars very easily. So, in that sense, a union, a trade union, is a good idea. Whether open borders was a good idea, whether the free movement of labor was a good idea, another question. Whether the excessive regulation from Brussels is a good idea. All of those things are really good questions to pose to the European Union. But Britain wasn't in the monetary union to begin with, so it didn't have that problem. It didn't have the ECB dictating to it. So what's going on now with Brexit is a very, very interesting experiment. And we'll see how England does outside of the Union, and we'll kind of learn from that.
So when a distributist looks at a major international conflict or a major international reconfiguration. Let's think of Brexit in those terms. The Distributist is not likely to have a sweeping across-the-board question, but will look at particular institutions and how those particular institutions are functioning. And we'll always be looking at them in terms of how can they be closer to the people, how can they be better configured so as to help people realize their potential rather than keeping people from realizing their potential by smothering them over with more institutional regulations than they need. Is that right?
I would say so, yes. How much of this really, how much regulation is actually needed compared to how much regulation the European Union actually has? Those are not questions that are clear to me. And I can perfectly understand why the English have those questions. I think the ones who really ought to have those questions are Greece, Italy, Spain, etc. It seems to me that they have been the big losers of the European Union, while Germany has been the big winner.
So we could have something that has a certain promise and a real need, overcoming tribalism and overcoming an exaggerated nationalism, neither of which the Distributist is interested in. And yet, even then, we have a kind of movement to the top of the more powerful.
Exactly, yes. See, so there's some interesting things going on in Europe right now with Poland and Hungary. I'm a bit skeptical, but I'm certainly interested in how those things work out. So we have 3 interesting experiments, or maybe 4, interesting experiments going on in Europe right now. Brexit, Hungary, Poland, and then the European Union itself. So how those things will all work out, well, it bears watching.
Yes, and in Poland at least, exceptionally, there's a strong religious sensibility, which is certainly not the case in the major European powers. And
yeah, in Hungary as well, yes.
Yes, well, in Hungary perhaps it's more with the leadership group than with the people across the board. Well, here, I've been butting in, call me Mr. Batinsky. Mario, Christopher, what's your take on Europe from the perspective of the battle over Brexit?
Well, when I first heard about Brexit, I was sympathetic to it. But it seems to me in this case, Great Britain's going to find itself either with the European Union or with another 800-pound gorilla, which will be the United States. So, for instance, I'll just take a homely example, I suppose. Europe has been able to ban GMOs. I wonder if European nations, if they were left to themselves in relation to the United States, would have the clout to actually end up banning GMOs. But the Union of Europe allows them to do it. What's going to happen to Great Britain now that it's now pretty much on its own? And it already has. I mean, it's almost like Great Britain is almost like a cockle boat, being pulled by the U.S. man of war. What's going to happen now with Great Britain's independence? Not a formal, union with the United States, but a kind of a moral union. What's going to happen to its economic and even political independence after Brexit? So I think that's maybe perhaps an example of how, it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't know.
All right, another caution. Mario.
Well, I have a different question about distributism, and that question I was asked many times before by some people. What is the role of the state for a distributist perspective? What is the role of the state, basically?
Well, it's to do whatever the local community cannot do by itself. I mean, there are both, shall we say, market goods and common goods. And some common goods can be provided locally, and some common goods can only be provided on a wider scale. So, for example, I don't think that, say, my city could have its own army. So obviously, this is something that needs a big state in the modern world. So the question about any organization is, well, what can it do that couldn't be done locally? And, well, in the modern world, there's a lot of things that fall into that category, but perhaps it's been overdone.
All right. Now, one of the things that distributists want to do, and we're doing it right now, is to generate discussion, and we hope it's sensible and at least fairly well-informed discussion. But often as not, we wind up thinking that we're not communicating. And there's that villain in Cool Hand Luke, the film Cool Hand Luke, who says, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Now, let's turn to the social media, and especially Twitter. We think we're using social media. I think we're using social media right now to enhance communication. But are there forms of social communication or vices of social media that exacerbate our failures to communicate? Anyone want to take a crack at that?
Well,
let me.
They're cautious too. All right, go ahead, please.
Okay, John, you going or?
Well, let me fill the silence just by saying that it's.
We're all afraid of silence, aren't we? No,
yeah,
it's one of the. Actually, stop and think for 2 minutes. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, so this is a new medium, and so there's precedent throughout history for a change of media, and Marshall McLuhan was big on this point. So I'll give you an example from that. If you look at the past, maybe it sometimes gives you some perspective. So the change from a manuscript culture to a print culture made possible a different way of looking at the Bible. And it made possible even the idea that everybody should read the Bible. Well, when Bibles were hand-copied, that was a pretty far-fetched idea. You know, when a Bible cost as much as a Buick, it's pretty hard to have the kind of Bible-based Protestantism, for example, that grew up after the printing press. So that's just an example of how a technology change, a communications change, leads to social change. So what will Twitter and Facebook and all of that do? I don't know, but it takes a while for these things for society to adjust to those changes. I can see good possibilities. I can see very, very doubtful situation that is on the ground now. But that doesn't mean that it can't, or we won't find a way to live with it that is beneficial. So that's a long-winded way of saying I don't know what the effects will be, but there will be tremendous effects comparable to what happened with the printing press.
Now, the Solidarity Party has a Twitter account now. Could I ask you, John, do you have a Twitter account?
I do, but I don't do Twitter. I personally find it to be a waste of time. It's not a way I communicate. So I was on it for a little while and just found it incredibly boring and time-wasting. But on the other side of that argument is, well, forcing people to be succinct and to express ideas in, 244 characters or whatever it is. I don't know. It forces us either into a world of aphorisms or into a world of memes. One could be looked on very favorably, and the other could only be looked on as something to avoid.
Okay, cards on the table. Mario, Christopher, do you have Twitter accounts?
I do not have a Twitter account. Apropos what John was saying about the change in technology, what you said earlier on when we all went silent, if we were sitting in a room together discussing, or even a panel discussion from an audience, a bit of silence might not seem so bad. But when you're on doing what's equivalent to radio, you just have nothing, and people wonder if they've lost the station, right? So you really can't. You can't be silent for very long, and that's forced upon us. It's a culture, if you will. It's forced upon us by the medium. That's not a bad. I mean, it's necessary if you have something like radio, obviously. But there are other things, I think, which the medium often forces upon us as a kind of culture of how we actually discuss things with one another. I've found over the years doing both email discussions and Facebook discussions, there's this almost like this, I don't know exactly what propels it, but there's this sense that you have to have an answer right away, and you have to, I guess in order to be remembered in your conversation, you have to have your answer right away, and it doesn't allow for, in a certain level, a period of contemplation. So I don't know if that's necessary to any of these media. If everybody understood that people are not going to answer you right away, like if you're writing letters, it might be different. But it seems the media almost compels this. It's a swift response, which actually tends to create rather half-baked or unbaked ideas.
Yeah, there's not a lot of time in the oven there.
That's right. So
yes, you just have to stick with the cookie dough. You're not going to get the cookie.
Exactly. And cookie dough is sometimes better than the cooked cookie, but in my opinion. But yeah, it's a problem, and I don't know. And I don't know if it's a problem that can be overcome with this media, at least as it's developed now. I think we're.
How do you deal with that, Mario?
Well, yes, the medium. Talking about Twitter, I have an account and I use weekly.
Oh.
If we want at least some intuition, some proposal to be out there, at least people take a look at what distributism or solidarity is, or Christian democracy is. I think that's some means through which we can at least propose something so that people can pay attention or at least take a look about what we are saying. And so, because I think one of the success of the left throughout the world, I think, was to win the battle of ideas. And also the right has done some of that too. So you want to be a proposal between the two big worldviews, if you will. We need to engage in some kind of conversation. Yes, it's limited. Yes, it's very quick. People forget. But if we are absent from that, well, then we, I think, are abandoning something which may be, to some extent, useful to engage in conversation. So I don't see as much. I don't see very negative that those means, even Facebook. I'm talking about Twitter because Twitter is more conversational, is quicker, and you discuss things from people from Spain and from Argentina. And I think the globalization process have reached to a point that we are discussing almost the same thing with different circumstances, but the idea seems to be very similar.
Well, we're supposed to go into the marketplace, that's for sure. And if that's the communication marketplace, I suppose we should be there. The Holy Father has a Twitter account. I'm more pleased, though, to see, and this is something that's developed in the last week, the American Solidarity Party has been mentioned favorably in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the New York Post.
Yes.
So we're surfacing in the public eye. That's certainly the case. Another big issue this week has been the caucus, the Iowa caucus, and now we're on the verge of New Hampshire, which won't be having the Iowa approach. John, some people might say that reporting problems aside, there's a real strong distributist dimension in the Iowa caucus. What would you say?
I would agree with that. I prefer, we've taken democracy to mean electoral democracy, where everybody gets in the voting booth, which resembles nothing so much as the Catholic confessional, and there you confess your political preferences in private. I prefer the caucus system where people talk and persuade each other and interact with each other and come to a consensus. So if you were asking me my preferences, I prefer caucuses to elections. I think they're far more social. I think they're far more distributist, and I think they're if caucus had become the form of democracy, I think democracy would be completely different than it is today. It wouldn't be so individualistic. It would be more communal. It would be more, in a word, distributist.
Excellent. Suppose somebody says, and I noticed throughout our conversation you're perfectly willing to give the counter argument. Suppose somebody says, yes, but to do that in Iowa, they first of all, in order to be informed, have to listen to the politicians for a year, while everybody in the media is watching them listening to the politicians for a year. And they have to have a level of civic participation already on the ground, and we just don't have that most places. So that's why we can't have a caucus. Sorry. What would you say about that?
Well, you're right. If you don't have it, it takes a while to develop it. That's absolutely true. But that doesn't mean it couldn't develop or shouldn't develop.
All right. So the objection should be turned around by saying, well, how important is civic participation? It's incredibly important, so get with it, people.
Indeed.
Okay, Mario, Christopher.
Well, I agree. I was talking to my family about the whole caucus thing because they were kind of confused on it, as I was myself. And at least to this together, it's a charming way of doing it, which I think is an argument for it. I think too. We in a certain sense we could have that more communal kind of participation in politics if people started to say go to their town or village meetings and actually engage in local politics, which unfortunately, because of our hyper focus on national politics, most people pretty much ignore. And there's some very important stuff that goes down in those meetings, which people don't seem to care at all about. So the whole kind of one man, one vote, get into the voting booth model, which might be necessary at a certain level, tends to make us think our civic participation is maybe once every 2 years, once every 4 years. And I think that's the sort of thing that, if you're going to have a democracy, it actually undermines it.
Let me ask everybody a question right now. What is the name of the mayor of your city?
Well, I just moved to my village. I don't know, but I did go to a village council meeting. So,
James,
a council member.
The mayor of Inglewood, California, a tool, mind you, of the entertainment industry and of the NFL, is a fellow with the unforgettable name Jimmy Butts.
But
I will reckon that 90% of the people can name the president, but not the mayor. So we've undergone this strange inversion where the national and even international politics are closer to us than local politics. That we are disconnected locally and connected nationally and internationally. So our neighbors' hoods are empty during the day, and we never meet our neighbors, but we connect with people all over, from the global village, as McLuhan would put it. Our friends in, say, France or Africa or New York might be closer to us than our next door neighbor. It's a strange inversion.
I wonder if part of it is because of how large many of where we live is. I live now in a village of 400 people, and like I said, I went to a village council meeting, and just taking a walk the other day, I ran into one of the village council members, and we had a long conversation. Nothing really significant, but I wonder, I lived in another town in California, which was considered small by California standards, about 7,000 people, and no one really cared much what was going on there. And you could run into your council members, but one always got, because there was so little civic participation, the council acted as if the voters were not really important.
And they're not. I was a city councilman for 10 years. So I tell you, no, the voters aren't all that important because there's so few of them that actually elect anybody, that actually take an interest. But as far as that being that's not a phenomenon of size, because New York City, I grew up in New York City, that was a lot more communal. I mean, you could not avoid your neighbors. But in the suburbs, well, you don't really live with your neighbors. You get in your car, you get in your little box in the morning, and you might drive 30 minutes, an hour, even 2 hours to get to your little box that you work in, and then get back in your box and go home to your home, which is another box separated from your neighbors. So the city was far more communal than the suburbs. The suburbs,
because in New York you have neighborhoods and boroughs, so there's a kind of smallness almost knitted into the very fabric of New York.
Right. New York is really a collection of villages, or at least it used to be a collection of villages, just, of villages that add up to about 10 million people in total, but all divided into their villages.
What's it like in Kansas, Mario? What's it like in Kansas?
Well, I don't have this experience of not knowing my neighbor. Quite the contrary. Even though I live in the suburbs, we know each other. And the idea that we don't know the name of the mayor may be because the city is being run well. There is not much problem, so I don't I don't have any interest in telling anything to my major. So, because I grew up in a different world, and when you knew exactly the name of your major, because everything was run badly. So it seemed to me that when a politician is invisible, it's much better. Nobody knows the president of Switzerland. If you go to Switzerland, I mean, people don't know about their administrator because somehow everything seems to be run smoothly. So that doesn't mean that one has not should not be interested in how the city is being run. But I think there are other reasons. The laws of community may have a different route or other routes. And so I think that's a different talk. But I have a question. Just you talk about New York and major and everything about that. And what are your thoughts as a distributist about Mike Bloomberg getting into the race, Democratic presidential contest? What is your thought about that? And he is not precisely going into the caucus. He's just skipping the caucus and going into, I think, Super Tuesday.
Well, I can't say I'm a big fan of Mike Bloomberg. I'm even less of a fan of him as a Democrat. It seems to me he's an old-line liberal Republican, and I suppose there's no space in the party anymore for the old-line liberal Republicans. But so more power to him, I suppose. But not for me is not a factor.
Is he in his own way a celebrity? Politics by way of celebrities?
Well, by way of money, he's a celebrity because he's rich.
and so celebrities are often rich, and rich people can very easily become celebrities. And why is it that we pay so much attention to celebrities?
Well, that's what celebrity means. Somebody who is celebrated. So it's not too. I mean, given a national media, it's not too surprising that you're going to have national celebrities.
It's said that the working definition of celebrity, even though we should all go back to the Latin for all important things, from the Latin to the Greek, that a celebrity is somebody who's famous for being famous.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and today
why do we care about these famous people so much? I mean, why do we listen to them?
Well, because we don't listen to our neighbors. It goes back to we listen more to the president than to the mayor. We don't even know who the hell the mayor is. We vote in national elections, but not in local elections. That is, the remote in this world, in the media world, the more remote is closer to us than the near. So it's one of these strange inversions of the global village. I don't know exactly what to do about it, but I can note the phenomenon.
I think you're right on target, and we should note it and keep wondering about it. Let me ask, given that we're, again, coming to the end of the hour, a lot of discussion in our conversation today about what we might call the public square, the public forum. And Richard John Newhouse, late Richard John Newhouse, founder of the journal First Things, spoke about the public square being naked. And naked in what respect? That there's no religious presence there. That we can have public forum after public forum, and there might be some perfunctory reference to religion, a little dose of civil religion, but no serious religious presentation. And oftentimes people will refer back to Reinhold Niebuhr, the Protestant realist theologian, as the last public intellectual who was explicitly theological in his perspective, but we don't have that today. Now, is that true? Is it mostly true? I guess the question is just how naked is the public square? What would you say, John?
Well, you mean naked in terms of religion?
Yeah.
I think there's too damn much religion in the public square, but it's a religion of, it's a secular religion. It's a, and it bears the faults of all other religions in that it tends to be exclusive and to allow only a limited number of voices. And in a sense that you can't almost avoid that. To have a discussion, everybody has to sort of, everybody has to sort of be on the same page, as it were. So there has to be a public morality, which is always, vague and fuzzy, at least at the edges, but at the core, it can only permit certain kinds of conversation and not others. So,
is that the Dallas experience speaking in you?
The Dallas experience?
Yes, too much religion, aka too much megachurch, too much Baptist influence, too many homemade preachers, or would you say the same thing is true in New York City or in Los Angeles?
Well, probably it is. I haven't lived in those places in a long, long time, but I'm not... For a theologian, I'm pretty skeptical of religion. Let's just say I can see religion justifying a lot of things that I would prefer not to justify. So I'm not entirely convinced that secularism is a bad thing.
John, let me press you on this. Is it religion or is it bad religion? And is it an example of the naked public square that nobody can say that's bad religion, this isn't bad religion, let's duke it out in theological terms right here in public? You can't say that because that wouldn't be polite, so you better leave the public square. That's no place to discuss theology, and we're not going to take it seriously. As a result, the only people that are really visible are people who are doing bad religion.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean there, but you see, to be without, say, a theology is impossible. Every claim to be a non-theology always hides a theology. So you have hidden theologies. Very interesting book out right now, The Enchantments of Mammon, by Eugene McCarraher, who the whole point of the book is that capitalism is itself a religion, the religion of Mammon.
Can you give us that title again, John?
Yeah, The Enchantments of Mammon. And it's a very good book. I highly recommend it. It's magisterial, and it's 700 pages, but it's worth it. It's worth it. And his thesis is counter to Weber's thesis. So Weber talked about the disenchantment of the world. But McCarraher's thesis is that capitalism itself is is no more rationalist or logical. It is, in fact, based on a series of myths. It is a religion, and I think he's right. So it's the problem is not religion versus the secular. It's two theologies battling each other, or two or more theologies battling each other. So religion isn't absent from the public square. It's hidden in plain sight. So we believe in we've all become mystics of the invisible hand.
Wow, mystics of that's a powerful phrase.
Yeah, I think that's. But the invisible hand has no more economic rationality behind it than, and probably less economic rationality behind it than the Trinity, or the Incarnation, or the virgin birth. It's a purely religious.
None of those are irrational.
Yeah, but they're not rational. They're not meant to be rational. They're not meant to be reduced to their four causes. As either is the invisible hand. It's really accepted or rejected sola fide, we just have a new religion. That's all.
John, we've come to the end of our hour, and we always close, or almost always close, with the gospel of the liturgy of the day, and this time, the gospel connects in a provocative way with what we've just now been discussing. This is from the Gospel of Mark. King Herod heard about Jesus, for his fame had become widespread, and people were saying, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why mighty powers are at work in him. Others were saying, he is Elijah. Still others, he is a prophet like any of the prophets. But when Herod learned of it, he said, it is John whom I have beheaded. He's been raised up. Herod was the one who had John arrested and bound in prison on account of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip, whom he had married. John had said to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Herodias harbored a grudge against him and wanted to kill him, but was unable to do so. Herod feared John, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man, and kept him in custody. When he heard him speak, he was very much perplexed, yet he liked to listen to him. Herodias had an opportunity one day when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers, his military officers, and the leading men of Galilee. Herodias' own daughter came in and performed a dance that delighted Herod and his guests. The king said to the girl, ask of me whatever you wish, and I will grant it to you. He even swore many things to her. I will grant you whatever you ask me, even half of my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? Her mother replied, the head of John the Baptist. The girl hurried back to the king's presence and made her request. I want you to give me at once, on a platter, the head of John the Baptist. The king was deeply distressed, but because of his oaths and the guests, he did not wish to break his word to her. So he promptly dispatched an executioner with orders to bring back his head. He went off and beheaded him in the prison. He brought in the head on a platter and gave it to the girl. The girl, in turn, gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. The Gospel of the Lord. Come, Lord Jesus, come.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.